Good morning. I want to start by thanking my family for being here this morning. My parents, Akiki Kamara Shavu, Lynn Hampton, Dennis Ald, my sister Linda, and my niece Brandy. So let's talk about plastics. When I started preparing for my talk today, I ran it by Dr. Salcedo to make sure that it wouldn't be vetoed. And like most of you might be wondering this morning, he asked me, just curious, why plastics? And my answer was, because it's everywhere. It has so much to do with the everyday life of the surgeon. And the question is, can you imagine your life today, like a single day in your life, today without plastics? I can't. And so I'm going to take you through a day in my life on, let's say, the trauma acute care surgery service. I start at home, and I wake up, make my coffee, plastics, brush my teeth, plastic, take my shower. Everything I touch in the shower is made of plastic. I pack my food as I do every day, plastic containers, and maybe a plastic bag for my snacks. Turn off the light switch, get in my car, and I'm perfectly surrounded by plastics. Make my way to work. And here we sit down for rounds. My pen is made of plastic. And everybody sits down for the morning report, and people run downstairs to grab their food because you have to stay nourished and stay hydrated for the day, and a bunch of plastics on the table. And so we finished there. Now we have to go see patients, the beloved blue gown. And as you can imagine, on one service, you have the attending, the chief resident, the R3, 4 interns, 2 NPs, 4 med students, so that's 13 people, seeing one patient. After a brief encounter with that patient, we've put 13 of those blue plastic gowns in the trash can. And with our 32 patient list, at least 10 of them will either have MRSA, VRE, and nowadays CRE. And so if you can imagine 10 people, that's the minimum. So that's 130 blue gown in the trash can. And when you combine ACS, which is acute care surgery, trauma blue, trauma gold, that's 390 of these by the end of morning round. So that goes without counting all the little things that we use. The gloves, the bags for the 4x4, the tape that we use, syringes for those who want to be fancy, and the saline bottles for taking care of wounds. All those are just like adding up to the pile of waste. And so now we get to the trauma bay. If you can imagine how many people go to the trauma activation code. Now we have more blue gowns. We have gloves, we have the eye shields, we have the shoe covers. And so to take care of the patient, we have a bunch of IV tubings, IV bags, saline bottles, et cetera, et cetera. We get to the OR beside that, and so if you multiply the number of trauma activation at the end of the day, it's a lot. And so now we go to the OR prep, more plastic. We get into the OR, and we just have to be sterile, so we have to perfectly drip our patient in plastic and use a bunch of disposable plastic instruments. So at the end of the day, as a surgeon, we have created a pile of plastic waste. And now you step back and think again. Can you imagine your life today without plastics? And so there was, this is not going. Okay. So what was life before plastic? We used to use natural matters to make what today is made of plastics. Some stuff weren't possible because we have to rely on natural material like rocks and wood. So that was in the United States, that was before World War I. So that was the time when hardwood floor was actually made of hardwood. When you had to return your glass bottle to get your next supply of cow milk, And you had to reuse your woven basket to buy bread and vegetables from the market. And for people who wanted finer things, they had to use tortoise shell to make their decorative pieces. And some people even use ivory to make a bunch of stuff like combs and jewelry boxes. So the problem with all those materials is that they are in limited supply. So they depend on the unpredictable nature of nature itself. And with things in limited supply, you have endangered species like the elephants for ivory and the turtles. So those had to be protected, and trees take a while to grow. And we needed alternatives to these materials. So here we go, the first plastic. So John Wesley Hyatt is credited for inventing the first plastic called celluloid. So the story goes that when he was 16, so he was born in 1837. So when he was 16, he ran across this ad from the billiard making company called Phelan and Colander. And the ad was offering $10,000 for the person who will create a synthetic substitute for ivory to make billiard ball. So it took him 20 years to come up with celluloid. We don't know if he got the $10,000, but he made it. And celluloid is a material that comes from a mixture of ground camphor, which comes from the camphor tree, and nitrocelluloid from cotton. And together they're heated and made into sheets that eventually will make those hard and shiny material that are not comparable, but they look like ivory and tortoise shell or marble. So the problem with Hyatt's invention is that we went back to the same problem we had before, natural resources. And so we needed alternatives to that because these trees were coming from Southeast Asia and became in limited supply as well. So here is Leo Bicklin, who is credited for making the first truly synthetic plastic. His inspiration came from the expansion of the electrical industry and the need for a synthetic alternative to rubber. And also shellac. So shellac is produced by a bug on trees, and rubber also comes from latex that produced on the bark of trees. And Leo Bicklin worked on this for years. He was born in Belgium and migrated to New York. And he came up with this substance called bakelite, and that he invented in 1907. So he used phenol from coal tar and formaldehyde, made the mixture, but to make a really hard plastic, he had to use like process with high temperature and high pressure, and he made the material that he called the material of 1,000 use. And he thought that he was a genius, so he called himself the magician because he was a chemist who could make this synthetic material and finally free humans from depending on nature. So he even earned himself a front page on the Time magazine in 1924. And if you can see, like the bottom of that page there is what he sold his plastic for. So it said, it will not burn, it will not melt. And that was relevant to the time because he was trying to make something for insulating electrical wires. His plastic is thermosetting, meaning that it's essentially not recyclable because you can melt it and make it into something else. So that was also the time when synthetic plastic made its way into American households. And there, his material of 1,000 use bakelite with the B and the infinity emblem sign at the bottom. After him, the plastic market became so profitable, the consumer market changed, and more people wanted to make plastic, and it just became complicated. So the plastic age is defined as this period from the 1920s to the 1940s, that transition through the world wars and coming out, economic expansion. So, and with the expansion of the automobile industry, also like the rise of petroleum, synthetic plastic just became the emblem of modernity. So we're finally able to make this product that came from resins that could be made inexpensively and massively produced. And this says Synthetica was published in Fortune in 1940, and it's represent or basically represent a denial of chemistry to free humans from dependence on nature, because at the top right corner of that map, you can see natural plastics, rubber, shellac, wax, and we're moving away from that. And the irony is that petroleum and even coal still come from the Earth's own organic waste, so layered over thousands of years. So essentially, we still depend on nature. And with all this proliferation of plastic, the question is, what is plastic exactly? This is a book that I read, and it's pretty entertaining, but it also goes through a lot of iconic items in the history of plastic, essentially the social transformation of our society with plastic. And I went to dictionary.com and also Marian.com to see if Marian Dictionary, to see if I'll find some better definition of plastic, and essentially I left as confused as I was trying to look at it. So eventually I found like a summary. So if you look at these are the most common plastics that we use. And I just put that table there to give you an idea of the quality of the different plastics and also what they do. And if you remember that map, Synthetica just tells you that we have tons of different types of plastic, and they come from different combination of mostly petroleum-based resins. And among them, we have all the polys, but also down the phenolic is different from the other one, and that's what Leo Baekeland invented. And that one is the one that doesn't melt. But these other plastic were made such that heat can make them more malleable, and they can be transformed into a lot of other things. So the question is plastic a bad thing? I don't think so. I think it's actually made it possible for us to do things we couldn't do before, especially like in medicine. All the IV tubings that we use, we're able to store blood. It just allows us to do more than we used to do before. And plastic is so light. I mean, if you can imagine a plastic chair, it's very lightweight, but it can support a heavy person. And when you think about the impact of, let's say, a truckload of milk, like plastic milk bottles, the weight of that is better for the highways in the United States than, let's say, the same volume of milk in a truck filled with glass bottles. So it's a good thing. I think the problem with plastic is the consumer mentality toward plastic. With the proliferation of synthetic plastic and how they're cheap and how, you can mass produce them, we got used to single-use plastic items. And I think that that's where our problem comes from. Throwaway Living was published in Life magazine in 1955. And it's about the making our lifestyle easier. So here you have disposable item cut down household chores. The problem with that picture is all those single-use items thrown up in the air will eventually land on the floor, And eventually somebody will have to pick them up and dispose of them. The question is, where should they go? And here is a picture that I took outside of our dining area here. And we have 3 bins. We have garbage, recycle, and compost. And, well, what do you put in there? Compost is where you put items that you think, if you put it in soil, it will be eaten by bacteria, eventually decompose, and disappear. So if that's what you think your item is, put it in compost. Recycle is where you put items that you think will be broken down and made into something else that you can use later. And if you don't know what it means, put it in the trash can. And so where do they go from there? All the waste we produce daily is part of the municipal solid waste. So that is generated from 3 different sources. There is the household, the institutional, like what we do here at the hospital, and commercial. And we can tell, like the EPA has been collecting these data. EPA is just the Environmental Protection Agency, and they've been collecting these data from 1960 all the way to these years. Their latest report is made of the data from 2015, and they show the increase in solid waste in the United States over the years, and this includes all solid waste. And these are just graphed over the years showing the plastic composition of the municipal solid waste. We can tell that in 1960, the plastic composition was less than 1%. But as we evolved through the years, now plastic makes up about 13% of our solid waste. Plastic is very light, and these percentages are based on the weight of the waste, not the volume. So in terms of volume, that's a huge volume of plastic. This is how we dispose of our waste in the United States. So most of our waste goes into our landfill. A small percentage get recycled. And since the 1980s, we actually started using compost. I went through this book. It's like a nice book that for people who don't quite understand, it's like Plastic Recycling 101. It goes into the economy of plastic recycling. And it's from a group from the Chemical Engineering Department at the University of Wisconsin. And they looked at all the data in the United States and Europe of the waste management system. And based on those data, they came with how profitable it is to dispose of plastic. So those are kind of like hypothetical analysis of that. Here is a graph from the EPA showing like what the ideal waste management will be. And source reduction is on top. Recycling, composting comes next. Energy recovery is when you burn the waste to produce energy that we can use for electricity. That's next, and landfill should be the least. But this is how we dispose of waste currently in the US. So the waste that you put in your bin, if you put it in recycle, like the recyclable area, it's carried by a truck to the material recovery facilities. And there, they separate them and eventually send them to recycle. Everything else goes either to be burnt or to the landfill. But landfill makes up the majority of how we manage waste. So going through just like the cost analysis of landfilling is expensive, but it doesn't really produce much profit in terms of energy recovery, nor does it produce profit in terms of recycling. The problem with landfilling, they have to comply with the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and that goes into essentially just trying to protect the earth and the waters from waste. And so the landfill, by complying to that, they have to line the landfill, they have to cover them every day, and worse is that they have to be closed after they reach a certain height, and after that it takes about 30 years of that landfill not being used and just for it to go through the process of recovering. So after that, we have to find another area to landfill our waste. But given that that's the main method of waste management, you can just imagine how much land we place to landfill. So don't look terribly at the number. This is just going through like hypothetical costs of a landfill. So in terms of building the landfill and maintaining the landfill in comparison to what we get out of that waste. So we don't get any energy and we don't recycle. So it's not profitable. Here is what goes on into the cost of a waste-to-energy recovery. So you get the waste that is dumped by the truck at the site and then lifted by a crane, put in the incinerator. The steam from the incinerator help generate electricity by turning turbines. The ashes from that is sent to landfill. Essentially, like cleaning up, avoiding pollution goes into the cost as well. So here is, again, another hypothetical summary looking at creating the site and maintaining the site. And looking at that cost, the major difference also in terms of the land that you can use for from the waste to energy recovery plant is that you can build a new plant at the site where you had an old plant. So you don't have to move and leave that plant to recover for 30 years like we do for landfilling. And here, just looking at profit. So burning plastic produces more energy than burning regular waste. But the total of all of it is negative profit because our facilities have to combine plastic and the rest of the waste. And then we move to plastic recycling. This will be the perfect scenario for plastic recycling if all the plastic that we buy and consume is properly disposed of and goes to the material recovery facility and then get processed, turned back into new plastic, put back into the market where we can buy it. But the problem goes with the cost of recycling. So first we go to the material recovery facilities. So these facilities rely on different chains of sorting. We start by humans who go there and maybe pick up the free-flowing plastics to keep them from messing around with the belts, and so the glasses get separated, papers get separated, eventually metals go out. And now for the plastic, of all the plastic, they get sorted. So I will go into the designation of plastic. So they're separated based on the polymers that are used to make them. So the number one plastic gets separated from the rest because that's the only one that currently in the United States we process to make new products. Everything else is not processed here. So either we have to sell it to different countries or we have to put it in landfill. The next stage of cost for processing plastic, so now they go to the facility to be processed. So even if they're number one, the problem is if they're contaminated, meaning having different colorants, having paper stick to them, having different shape that cannot be melted together, they essentially make them non-recyclable because we cannot process them to make new resin. So looking at all those, this is again hypothetical cost. of the material recovery facility and the processing facility. In the end, it's negative because we have to sort out tons of stuff. Like our recycle box has glass and papers and different type of plastic, and all that just to recover a single type of plastic. So eventually, PET is there, is the only one that will recover, and that's why it's negative. And if you go here, you can see why. And here is a summary of the different type of plastic, and I was talking about PET. It's called the #1 plastic, not because it's the #1 most common plastic we use. It's just because it's the #1 plastic that is recycled around the world. And there, the #2 is polyethylene, and #3 is polyvinyl chloride that is used in most of the medical tubings and bags that we use. And then you go to the rest. So in the grand scheme of things, PET, which is the #1 plastic recovered, is the #6 in terms of how often we use it. So why is plastic recycling so complicated? It's because it's not economically profitable. In the United States, we recycle only 9.2% of our plastic waste. And the plastic sorting and processing just cost a lot for what we recover from it, especially since PET only makes up about 14% of all the plastic we process. And the other caveat is the cost of plastic resin from recycling is very dependent on the cost of crude oil, so that's petroleum. And you can see that graph over the years that shows that the cost of the plastic that we recycle really depend on the cost of, on the price of oil. So the big question is, where does #2 through 7 plastic go? Because we use it a lot. And China, over the years, with its economic expansion, has become the world's largest producer of plastic, but also the world's largest market for post-consumer plastic. And this is a graph from the International Solid Waste Association Task Force in 2014 that showed that the amount of the type of plastic that we send there. So we can see PE, which is #2, and #4 plastic, polyvinyl chloride, which is #3, and polystyrene, which is #6. So polypropylene and all the others that we can describe, which are all grouped under #7, are in the red zone. But China has its own problems. With the production of plastic, their domestic consumption of plastic has also increased, meaning that their market can remain local. So they're recycling their own plastic. And in 2017, they came with the Operation Green Fence, where essentially they announced to the World Trade Organization that they were going to ban importing plastic from, not plastic, but some kind of waste from other countries, and plastic being one of them. And if you can recall, during that period sent us into crisis because our material recovery facilities had piles of #2 through 7 plastics that we couldn't send anywhere. And you can imagine where all that goes, eventually in the landfills. And this other graph there from the World Bank, published in 2005, was just predicting the rate at which China is now consuming plastic, and the component of their plastic waste, which is becoming comparable to the United States in terms of the percentage of their municipal solid waste. So they're predicting that in 2030, the component of their, the plastic component of their solid waste will be 14%. So this study was conducted by a group at the University of Georgia. they were looking at all the data that we have regarding how we manage waste, and they looked at them across the world to determine how much plastic eventually ends in the ocean. And they looked at 192 countries, like all those coastal countries, and the waste they produce. So based on, and their analysis were based not only on the amount of plastic produced and consumed, but also on how people process plastic in their respective countries. And they came up with 8 million tons of plastic dumped into the ocean during that time. So this sparked like a lot of conversations around the world. As you guys can just imagine, with our landfill, let's say the fact that we have all this stuff that we can send anywhere except for landfills, they're filling the ocean, and you've heard all these talks about the Pacific garbage patch. So I started looking to figure out what is this, because there are like different accounts and stuff. So my simple way of understanding it is that you have current flowing from Washington to California to Japan and back to the American coast. So they make this loop, and with the meeting of like the temperature from the equator and the cold temperature from the Arctic, they create this whirlpool that's just never ending. And you can imagine with them collecting plastic from all the coasts, eventually you just have them circulating there. And that's this point. So this little area here is blown up here. And you can, there is this area called Midway Atoll, which is a United States preserve, like a refuge for some animals. So in that area, you don't really have predators. And people are starting to look at those animals and the fact that plastic is becoming their predator because fish and birds are dying from it. And don't worry, I wasn't going to put like ugly picture of birds like dead with their stomach full of plastic. I decided to just leave those beautiful birds there. So all this is part conversation about the fact that we have to change the way we either consume or dispose of plastic. So some potential solutions. Europe is way ahead of us, like way ahead. They started dealing with this since the 1990s, where they decided to start saying no to landfilling. And their method of disposing of waste is mostly waste to energy, where they burn their waste to produce electricity. But also they use recycling in a way that's better than us. And to be able to do that, there is this green dot policy across Europe that puts the responsibility on the manufacturer. So manufacturers have to pay based on the weight of plastic that they produce to package products, and label them with a green dot so that when the consumer buys that plastic, they will understand that the manufacturer had paid a fee upfront for them to recycle the plastic. So it put more incentive to put that in a specific container that will be picked up and be sorted in a better way than just us putting paper and glass and plastic, all of them together to go to the material recovery facilities, which are already economically stranded. They eventually, like in October 2018, actually the European Union passed a law to ban single-use plastic across Europe. And these include like what they analyzed was just laying on their beaches. So those are like plates and shopping bags and cups and straws and all those items that we use every day and throw away. China, I've talked about the Operation Green Fence, which was kind of detrimental to us initially, but when you think about the environment, it was a good thing. And California is the state cheers to us, in the United States, that's leading the way in terms of management of waste. So in 2016, we all went to the poll and had to vote yes or no on Proposition 67, which said that all the big grocery stores had to stop providing single-use plastic bags. And if the provided alternatives such as paper bags or plastic bags that could be reused, then they had to charge us 10 cents for it. So we voted 53% yes to that, and now it's effective here. The other law that California has passed is the ban on straws that became effective January 1st of this year. It's not quite a ban, so what it's requiring is for fully running restaurants, so these are not even like the takeouts, but the other restaurants, from automatically providing you with a straw. So you have to ask for a straw for them to give it to you. So it's not telling them not to give it. It's just saying that for them to give it, the consumer has to ask, so maybe don't ask for it. But it doesn't put the same ban on the takeout restaurant, which actually are the ones that produce the straws. So we have some other individuals in the United States who are more just courageous. Boyan Slat has been criticized by a lot of people for making the Wilson, which he raised over $31 million for, after proposing to create this system that will eventually clean up the garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean. So he created this group called Ocean Cleanup. If you go to their website, you'll see a nice description of the Wilson with an encouragement to contribute money to do it. But so far, they have tried and they have not been successful. And during one of his interviews, when he was asked, why start with such an ambitious goal? Why not just like deal with the laws to prohibit plastic in the first place? And he said, well, everybody can do what they can. If I can at least clean up the plastic waste, that's what I'll do. So far, it hasn't been successful. There is this couple called Judith and Richard Lang, who noticed that Kehoe Beach, which is in California, next to close to Point Reyes, oftentimes you will just walk on the beach and find plastic washed out from the ocean on the beach. So what they decided to do is turn it into jewelry and several decorative pieces for people's homes. So they pick up plastic waste from the beach and they make items that they sell online. And she even got married in a dress made of plastic that she picked up from the beach. And Beth Terry, this is interesting. She made this website called My Plastic Free Life, where she has 100 steps toward living a life without plastic. The only problem is that she still carries a plastic credit card. And so other than that, the other solutions include the bioplastics. So the bioplastics bring us back to 1870s. You remember Hyatt with the invention of celluloid. So this is what people are now reverting back to help mitigate the issue of plastic. And I looked through like several companies that try to make the bioplastic, where they take sugar to make polylactic acid and make these plastics that they are selling for being biodegradable. At least in my opinion, the only company that kind of made sense to me was Xyloco. And this was invented by a man called Marshall Bedoff, who was thinking about what he called the biomass. It's essentially the non-food cellulose that you find in nature. So he is taking all the dead leaves or farms that have corn husk or grocery store or whatever items that are made of plants that people don't want to use can go and dump it to Xyloco, and they'll turn it into ethanol that you can use to power your car or biodegradable plastic. So what can we do? I emailed the UC Davis Health Waste Management Department to figure out what do we do with our waste, because after all the stuff that I described before about how much plastic waste we put out every day, I wanted to know what do we do with it. So this is what they described to me. We have different type of waste. We'll start with the biohazard. Those are stuff that go into the red bag. They're supposed to be items that are stained with blood, whether they're plastic or non-plastic. So those get autoclaved, eventually go to the landfill. The cost of it is about a quarter per pound. And the goal is to have less than 10% of that produced. The next one is the medical waste, which is essentially what's in the pharmaceutical and sharp. Those get incinerated, and the cost of incineration is really high. The other solid waste that we get, like the non-soiled one, also goes to landfill. And the recycle, which is the last part, those are supposed to be plastic boxes, plastic bottles, papers, etc. The problem with that is if you put bloody item into a bag that's supposed to be recycled, if it's soiled by 5%, that whole bag goes to landfill because it cannot be recycled. So what can you do in terms of this? Just dispose of things properly. Try to be cognizant about where you put items. And if you feel that they have to be recyclable, try not to stain them with blood, essentially. Or don't put blood-stained item into the recyclable bin. And going back here, what can we do? So starting at home, most things at home are, you can use them multiple times. Maybe the things that we can do are to avoid those individually mounted dental floss that are on the toothpicks, because every single one of them comes on a piece of plastic that you'll throw away, and that will not necessarily be recyclable. And maybe the bags that we use for snacks, just reuse coffee mugs and all the other items that you can reuse. In terms of around, bring your own item to eat, or in the cafeteria nowadays, I mean, at least at some point, we had the compostable containers, and we came up with compostable utensils. But now I think they're trying to trick us. They're like the Dixie one that I recently saw in the cafeteria, and I looked on them, it doesn't say compostable, so I'll assume that they're not compostable. And the one we had before were, so I don't know what happened to that. In terms of the blue gown, if you think about it every day, we wear scrubs. We can stain them with blood. We'll put them back into the linen bin. They'll get washed, put back on the shelf, and we'll wear them and see patients. So why not have the same type of thing in these rooms where we use these items for less than 5 minutes, don't soil them, and put them in the trash can. So we can prevent infection, but at the same time also be responsible in that term. And I know that's not necessarily on you and me. It's based on the cost for the hospital, but it's possible. And same goes for the OR, for example. I look at Southside Kaiser. If all of you remember the period when Kaiser came up with the washable gowns in the OR, so they were sterile, but maybe for economic reasons, they got taken away. But at South Kaiser, they still use metal ports, and the instruments are, their scissors are reusable, clip appliers are made of metal, so they can be autoclaved and be reused. But it's easier to use the plastic one, the plastic clip applier, the plastic scissors, the plastic port that will throw away after being used once. In the medical arena, there is a lot that we need a lot of single-use items for infection prevention. So what should be the long-term solution for that? Maybe that will be the site where bioplastic may be applicable, where they can be used once and thrown away. The problem with bioplastic, maybe they'll have a short shelf life, but given the fact that they'll be used once, maybe they shouldn't be mass-produced, be produced for use, and then used and expired, since they'll be thrown away anyways. In summary, this is what we need to do. And some of you have seen this slogan before. So reduce your use of single-use plastic. It's really hard. I've been working hard to be like Eric DeSoucy and wear my durable eye shield, but I forget it at home, and I have to use like the single-use one that I'll throw away. Sometimes to appease my guilt, I keep it somewhere and hide it, but when I come back to the OR, it'll be gone. Someone will have thrown it away. So I started carrying it in my pocket. So now I'm working toward just buying one that I can use just the same way we do our loops. And just reduce the use of single-use plastic if you can. Reuse, just use them as many times as possible. I don't think plastic items are bad. If we change our mindset toward plastic and treat it the same way we do metal, the same way we do wood, it will change the perspective, because at least it can be washed and can be reduced the same way as we do those other items. And when you've used it so much that you can't use it anymore, then recycle it. I want to thank Dr. Galante, Dr. Salcido, all my co-residents, the attendings, all the nurse practitioners for the last 7 years, just for making it possible and helping me be who I am today. I want to thank my mentors. Dr. Farmer couldn't be here today. I'm sad, but she let me know that she couldn't be. So I thank her for supporting me through all these years and just helping me achieve all my goals and being present when I needed her. And Dr. Catherine Troutman for believing in me all these years and just being one of my strongest supporters. And all of you, thank you so much. I can't end this presentation without thanking my family for always being there for me. I've told some of you, but some of you don't know. So when I came here at the age of 16 in Alexandria, I met Lynn and Denny. I can't tell you how we became family. It just happened over the years. Finally, when I was in residency here during my second year, we realized, well, we're a family, but we're not officially family. And we learned from some friend of ours that there is this thing called adult adoption. So we decided to adopt each other and become officially a family. Believe it or not, I was a resident. Some social worker called me to interview me, but just to go through the formalities. But we did. My mom, Aikiki, is a very strong woman, and I owe a lot of who I am to her. And eventually I was blessed by the fact that she came here to live with me. My niece, Brandy, is currently also living with me. You can tell that she's the only one on that picture among the people I'm mentioning. My sister, Linda, as well. The reason why I have only my nieces and nephews on this picture is to tell you just the value I see in them. I have 17 and plus nieces and nephews. They're just very precious. They're like my children. And even some of them who haven't met me yet, they know me, and I talk to them on the phone. And I just thank all of them for loving me, for just being me. And that will conclude my talk today.
Take over from here. Thank you, Sandra, so much for always enlightening us with fresh perspectives. All 7 years, you have just brought new ideas and just your being, and makes you're very easy to believe in and have faith in. So thank you very much, and we wish you lots of success. Just a couple of comments and questions. When I was a child in Germany, I remember that they actually get a bag with the green Punkt, the green dot, and sometimes neighbors would sneak out and put their garbage in someone else's garbage, because you only got a little bag each day for your recycling. So that's one comment. In terms of the bioprosthetic, how is that recycled? Is that compost or is that
Compost.
Landfill? So it's compost, even though it has...
Compostable if we dispose of it properly.
Okay, great. I know my kids taught me about reduce, reuse, recycle. The only one I can't part with, though, is the diaper. I don't think I could reuse the diaper. So do we have any questions or comments for Sandra? Dr. Z.
I know the first one campaign, you were rid of adding this much purple padding to fill the landfill forever. You like beds which have this much padding. Do you know which class of, I assume those things just land up in landfill forever?
That I don't know, but we can look it up. Maybe we can start some kind of campaign at the hospital for that. And I don't really know. We'll have to find out.
I think we can all start with being more conscientious, not using the red bag, which is a quarter in comparison to a nickel. I think that was very enlightening. And maybe not having every resident wear the gown as they go in. We used to have the cloth gowns here for a brief period of time in the early 2000s, I think, but it must have cost more to process. So we wish you well for the rest of your year and are excited about your future as a pediatric surgeon.
Thank you.
Thank you.